Alrighty, well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Andrew Doffney. I'm the Instruction and Outreach Librarian at the New Jersey State Library, and it is my pleasure to present our speaker for today, Sergeant Michael Rosati from the Office of Insurance Fraud Prosecutor. Today we're going to be talking about scams and frauds, particularly that target seniors, but some of these can be extended to other people who are part of different government programs that Sergeant Rosati is going to be speaking about. So it has wide implications, and with the prevalence of things being done online these days and in a digital environment, there's uh, a lot of uh, a lot more opportunities for scammers to target individuals. So we'll be very interested to see what Sergeant Rosati has to say. Um, his career in investigations began in 2011. He has handled investigations for Horizon, New Jersey Health's Special Investigations Unit, the Pennsylvania Office of Inspector General's Bureau of Fraud Prevention and Prosecution, and as a federal contractor for the United States Office of Personnel Management. He joined the New Jersey Medicaid Fraud Control Unit as a detective in 2017, and during his time with this unit, he has worked on a wide variety of criminal cases involving high-dollar provider fraud schemes, pharmaceutical drug diversions, theft, financial exploitation, as well as cases involving the abuse and neglect of disabled or elderly victims. In May of 2024, he was promoted to the rank of sergeant within the MFCU, where he continues to conduct investigations and supervise a team of detectives assigned to the southern region of the state. He's an active member of the New Jersey Elder Protection Task Force and presents regularly at education and outreach events for law enforcement groups, medical providers, schools, and seniors. So again, welcome so much, Sergeant Rosati. Thank you for speaking with us today. Before we jump into your presentation, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First and foremost, we will be taking your questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to submit them at any time using the Q&A or the chat feature in the Zoom dashboard. At the end of the webinar, there will be a survey available. So if you have time, we ask you please complete the survey. We really do appreciate any and all feedback that you can give us. And if you want more information about scams and fraud, you can visit the Office of Insurance Fraud Prosecutor's web address. It's on the screen there. I will be sending it out in the chat in just a moment so that if you want to visit it at your leisure, I highly encourage you to do that. And then one last thing I have for you is just a brief overview of the Zoom dashboard. This is what your dashboard should look like if you're using a PC or a Mac. If you're using a mobile device, the dashboard may look a little bit different, but all of the features will still be there. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can check your audio settings. So if you're using an external listening device like a headset or earbuds, you can check to make sure that it's connected properly there. At any point during the presentation, if you have any issues, there is a raise hand button here in the middle. You can click on that and that'll alert me. I will send you a message in Zoom and hopefully be able to resolve any problems that you are having. And as I mentioned, if you do have questions, please feel free to use the Q&A or the chat buttons to get in touch with us. And again, we'll be addressing them at the end of the presentation today. So that is everything that I have for you. So it's my pleasure to turn it over to Sergeant Rosati now.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And thank you everyone for joining with us today. So as Andrew covered in my introduction, I am a sergeant with the state's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. And I'm going to go into a bit more about what our office does and how that impacts our efforts to fight fraud against seniors. So my goals for this training, what I hope to accomplish is that everyone that attends will be more familiar with the New Jersey Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, sometimes abbreviated to MFUCU or MFCU. So to be familiar with our unit and what our role is in combating elder abuse and crimes against seniors within the state. I'm also hoping to have our audience by the end of this be able to identify key signs of elder abuse, whether it's targeting yourself, a friend, or a loved one. I would also like us to be aware of how and where to report concerns that you may have about scams, frauds, or elder abuse. And lastly, my hope is to have the audience familiar with several current fraud schemes that have been happening locally and throughout the country. So let's get started. All right, so essentially our mission at the New Jersey Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, our core mission is to protect Medicaid beneficiaries and the Medicaid program itself from fraud, waste, and abuse. Our office is jointly funded by the state of New Jersey and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services at the federal level to address crime impacting the two areas you see up on the screen. So one being traditional Medicaid fraud, that's fraud against the Medicaid program, and then also elder abuse, so abuse that takes place against patients or residents, so abuse, neglect, which takes place in a healthcare facility against that population. So simple question is, what is fraud? So it's in the title of my presentation. We're going to talk about it a lot. And I like the simplest definition for it. So fraud to me is telling lies to steal money. To help illustrate how fraud impacts our state's Medicaid program, our office has put together this brief, it's just a minute video. All right, again, there's our contact information. It'll be available again at the end of the presentation. So Medicaid fraud and you. I know that many people in this audience have their insurance through other means, so either through Medicare or through private insurance. But it's important to keep in mind that fraudulent providers, so providers, doctors' offices, medical supply companies, who are engaging in fraud schemes are not going to be particularly picky about only choosing one type of insurance to exploit. So they often target multiple types of insurance for the same fraud scheme. But getting back to Medicaid, in 2024, our state's Medicaid spending, so jointly between the federal government and the state, was estimated to be over $22 billion. So that's billion with a B. This covers roughly 2.1 million residents, and including up to half of the children in our state. So when a criminal wants to steal from Medicaid and get their hands on some of that $22 billion in funding, or really wants to get their hands on any insurance-related money from an insurance provider, it isn't like robbing a bank. They can't just walk into a Medicaid office or an insurance carrier's office with a gun and demand all the money that they're seeking. They have to find creative ways to steal through fraud. So again, through the act of telling lies to steal money, they have to come up with schemes in order to get those ill-gotten gains. So whether your insurance is through Medicaid or through some other means, what this basically means is false claims submitted under your insurance. Some of the areas we've seen an increase in this is with durable medical equipment. So those are things like compression stockings or diabetes supplies or walkers, wheelchairs. And the key thing here is these are items that have never been ordered, or they've been ordered but they were never received. There's also unnecessary or excessive testing, procedures, or drugs. We've seen an uptick in these either internet-based or telephone-based scams where they obtain insurance information solely for the purpose of creating fictitious bills. Services billed but not performed. So again, this could be a legitimate provider who you've seen, but then they add things to your claim, seeking reimbursement for services that they've never actually provided, or it could be a provider that you've never seen, who basically fabricates a record indicating they provided some service to you, but it was never actually provided. Beneficiaries, so the insurance patients are necessary for these schemes to exist. So the offending provider needs patients in order to bill. Sometimes those patients, and I'd say oftentimes those patients are completely unaware of their involvement or participation in the scheme. So what are some warning signs? So again, this is Medicaid specific, but it really applies to any insurance that you have. Some things to be on the lookout for: receiving medications that you do not use or in an excessive amount that you could never actually get through, tests or procedures or that durable medical equipment that you receive or is given to you that just doesn't seem to be appropriate for your issue. So if it has nothing to do with a condition that you have or a diagnosis that you've been given, it's obviously suspicious if you're receiving medications, equipment, or tests that have absolutely nothing to do with it. Another red flag is when a provider does not collect a copay from you. That could be an indicator that there's something nefarious going on with their claim submission process, what they're asking to be paid for, because if there is a copay that they should be collecting from you, they absolutely should be collecting it to the appropriate amount. Charges on your explanation of benefits that don't make sense to you. If you have, regardless of what your insurance is, whether it's Medicaid through a managed care organization, or it's Medicare, or it's a private insurance company, I absolutely encourage you to reach out to their benefits department and have them explain anything that's unusual on any benefits explanations you receive. Sometimes the language is just complicated, or it's billed in a way that doesn't make sense to the lay person, but sometimes it doesn't look right because it isn't right. We've had countless investigations where we go to patients later and we'll talk about a procedure that really didn't make sense to them at the time, but they just thought they didn't think it was worth bringing up, or I thought I was just misunderstanding it. But yeah, sometimes these are significant red flags to what a provider is doing to improperly bill your insurance or your benefits. It's important to remember that social engineering and legitimate authority, which are common practices in a lot of fraud schemes, can be a part of these insurance-based frauds. And if you're not familiar with what those are, social engineering is the use of deception to manipulate people into divulging or giving out private or confidential or personal information that they can later use for fraudulent purposes. So again, these are sometimes the motivation behind those robocalls you receive, or those suspicious outreaches on social media, where someone is attempting to get you to disclose information or provide them information, by pretending that it's an actual normal request, or that somehow this is a normal thing for you to disclose when it isn't. So trust your instincts there. And then legitimate authority is basically creating the false impression that a request or an outreach contact is coming from an actual authority. So whether that's a government office, law enforcement agency, or even your bank or other institution that you actually use, the perpetrators will pretend that these requests are coming from one of these legitimate authority sources to make it appear as if disclosing that information is ordinary or harmless. And again, just because we're talking about different insurance types, if you suspect fraud against Medicare specifically, since that is a federal program, the appropriate law enforcement agency to investigate a fraud scheme with them would be the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Inspector General. Private insurance at the state level, we're part of the Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor, so it's really just the other side of our house. We'll handle any complaints about private insurance fraud. All right, so in addition to our office's efforts to combat traditional Medicaid fraud, as we covered in the last couple slides, we're also committed to addressing elder abuse. So this includes investigating alleged patient or resident abuse or neglect in healthcare facilities, providing resources and information to the community through trainings and outreach like this one, also referring cases to appropriate law enforcement or administrative agencies, which I'll get into later in this presentation. And we also support local law enforcement, providing guidance on cases they're investigating, and assistance as needed, and conducting outreach with them to kind of educate their officers and departments. The video I'm about to play here is actually from the U.S. Department of Justice. DOJ put together a really good training series that's kind of geared towards local law enforcement, recognizing elder abuse and highlighting cases that have taken place. So this particular video highlights one such case from the state of Minnesota.
One day, my uncle called me and he said he needed some money, some bonds. So, without question, it's his. I gave it to him, and it was a significant amount of money. And 3 weeks later, he called me up and he said he needed more. And I go, "What are you using this for?"
Misty McKinley found Roger Waller, we think, at a gas station. We think she simply saw an easy target. She asked him for a small amount of money. He gave it to her. Somehow she found out where Mr. Waller lives, and she proceeded to go to his home, and she would ask him for money. She would ask him for rides.
Misty McKinley was the type of person that she preyed on people like that. She looked for opportunity, people that she could manipulate and take advantage of.
On a few occasions, Misty McKinley had Mr. Waller drive her to the gas station, and when they got there, she'd have him fill up her boyfriend's car with gas. And that made Mr. Waller very uncomfortable, but he didn't know how to say no.
She would come around, she would knock on the door, and after my insistence of him not answering the door, she started to knock on the windows. When she would show up here, bugging you, what did that feel like to you when she was knocking on the windows?
She knocked on the window here.
Yeah. How'd that make you feel?
I didn't like that at all.
His train of thought was, if I just give her what she wants, she'll go away. Well, we obviously know that that's not the greatest idea. So I put a surveillance camera up so I could see when she was coming, what times of day she was coming. I could see 2 in the morning, I could see 4 in the morning. One day, she had walked around the house for an hour, knocking on windows and doors.
What are you doing here?
Mr. Waller told her he didn't want her to come to his home anymore. He felt intimidated. He was starting to feel scared because she simply wouldn't stay away.
I noticed he became quieter. He just seemed way more reserved than normal, lost weight.
Mr. Waller's family actually caught her in the act of coming over and knocking on his door. Despite numerous requests to stay away from the home, she kept coming back. So they got a restraining order.
She knew she was taking from somebody who didn't have anything to give her and kept coming back and back and back and back and would not go away.
The first time Misty was charged, she was charged with a couple counts of violating the harassment restraining order.
She was caught once, she went to court once, pled guilty once, and they let her go. And when they were supposed to bring her back for sentencing, she never showed up.
It was really difficult because she would come at all hours of the day, and then she was gone so quickly. And so it took a long time before we were ultimately able to take her into custody.
As we were building evidence for the case, specifically looking at the financial exploitation, it ultimately came down to evidence on what we could prove in court.
In this case, because it was small amounts of cash over a long period of time with really no record kept, we just didn't have enough evidence to establish the amount necessary for a felony level financial exploitation case. The most serious offense that we had was a stalking offense, and so that's the one I charged. I will say that as part of her sentencing, it was important that she be required to pay back some of the money. I was happy with the outcome of the case. She was terrorizing him. At one point, he told the investigator that he felt like a prisoner in his own home, and stopping that was really our #1 priority.
How are you feeling now that she is no longer?
Well, I feel good about it.
You feel good? You're feeling a little bit more like yourself?
Yeah.
When you walk through this neighborhood, they know who Roger Waller is. He's known in his community. And for somebody to be known in their community, loved in their community, to be taken advantage in their community, to be made to feel like they're not safe is not okay.
All right, and for anyone who's interested, that website at the top, www.justice.gov/elderjustice, there's a lot of different case studies and videos they put out there similar to this one. Some of them, I will warn you, are a little bit more graphic, so I didn't choose them for this particular presentation because they deal with the other types of abuse that have been investigated and highlighted. So, and that's actually what we're going to talk about with next is the different types of elder abuse that take place. Essentially, elder abuse, sort of broadly speaking, is the mistreatment or harming of an older person. It occurs both in community, as we saw in the video. So that would be an example of elder abuse taking place in the community. It also takes place in institutional settings and can take many different forms. So there is a key distinction there on who the appropriate or the right law enforcement or administrative advocacy agency would be, depending on if the victim lives in the community or if they live in a healthcare setting or an institutional setting. So in that case, as you saw, the local police department, and it could be, New Jersey would likely be also moved up to the county prosecutor's level, where they would investigate indications investigate cases involving elder abuse in the community. Our office handles criminal investigations of elder abuse when it takes place in some form of institutional or healthcare treatment facility. But the different types of elder abuse, the different forms that it can take are financial exploitation, as we saw in the video, also physical abuse, emotional or psychological abuse, sexual abuse, and neglect. One thing that I'm going to talk about throughout this presentation, though, is that elder abuse is believed to be widely underdetected and underreported. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, and the Department of Health and Human Services, 1 in 10 Americans over the age of 60 have experienced some form of elder abuse and neglect. It affects communities on many levels, and from a public health and civic participation standpoint, also impacting economic resources for the victims. So there is a trickle down oftentimes on the Medicaid program because of that financial and economic impact that this type of fraud or exploitation can have on an older person. A 2017 study estimates that 15.7% of people aged 60 and over are subjected to some form of abuse yearly. Again, however, this is likely to be a underestimation, as only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse is believed to be reported. That's sort of a breakdown of the types of abuse. As you can see, psychological abuse being the most common category that's identified, with financial being the second most common. So who are the abusers? Who are the offenders here? Elder abuse can happen at home, and often it does. 90% of abusers are family members. These include adult children, spouses, and partners, which creates a lot of complications for any investigation or for intervening on behalf of the victim. These may be codependent situations. There may be reluctance to participate in holding the offender accountable, or excuses being made to justify behavior because they don't want the offender to get in trouble. You're dealing with family dynamics. You may be dealing with children fighting over assets related to inheritance, things of that nature. Elder abuse, though, also can happen in institutions. So according to, I believe these statistics come from the World Health Organization, but those statistics show that 36% of staff in these types of institutions have witnessed some sort of physical abuse. 10% have committed physical abuse themselves, and 40% have committed some form of psychological abuse. So again, something to consider, is to think to yourself, why do you believe that elder abuse is so widely underdetected and underreported? Some insight on that, only 4% of elder abuse is reported. And the reasons that have generally been accepted and identified is fear of retaliation. So again, the concern that the abuse is only going to get worse if I get the offender in trouble. Maybe it's someone that you can't easily get away from, so you don't want to have to face them. after you've made a complaint or tried to bring the concerns to light. Worry about getting the abuser in trouble. Again, this really becomes entangled with family dynamics, family relationships, or when you're dependent upon someone. The victim may be mentally incapable. They may have some sort of diminished capacity, or be, unable to communicate or feel that they don't have the ability to articulate or communicate what exactly is going on. They may be confused or not have, all of their financial records accessible to them, so they're not really sure what's happened or don't know how to go about reporting it accurately. And then the last one I think is probably the most common, unfortunately, which is the fear of feeling ashamed or embarrassed. It's human nature. Anyone, and it's completely normal for anyone to feel embarrassed when they're a victim of some sort of abuse or fraud, or even scams, as we get into later in this presentation. To feel that somehow you were at fault, or that you were too gullible, or that somehow it's your fault that this happened. It's human nature sometimes to feel that way, and we see it all the time. But dealing with the issue alone, hiding it or ignoring it, it's often just going to make things worse. They talked about it actually in that video out of Minnesota, where he was hoping that if he ignored it, she would just go away. But as we saw, if somebody has enough motivation, or they're seeking to obtain something from you that's important to them, ignoring them is usually not going to work. So again, I just emphasize, please report your concerns for yourself, for your friends, for loved ones. If you see something, please absolutely say something, and hopefully this presentation will give you some more resources on places you feel comfortable making those complaints or bringing those concerns to light. So what are some signs to be aware of? It's really important that we all know the signs of elder abuse, so we can immediately report any suspicions of abuse occurring in the community or in any sort of institutional long-term care setting. Physical abuse are a little bit more straightforward, but some of the things to be on the lookout for would be obviously broken bones, bruises, welts, things that you can clearly see, injuries of that nature. Untreated bed sores are a telltale sign of neglect, improper, caring for pressure ulcers or wounds. Torn, stained, or bloody clothing, so generally appearing uncared for, or that you haven't been properly sanitized. Sexually transmitted diseases without clear explanations are indication of physical abuse, and obviously potentially sexual abuse that may be taking place. Dirtiness, poor nutrition or dehydration, poor living conditions, lack of medical aids that are required. So if somebody wears glasses, yet you see them oftentimes without them, someone who uses a walker but has been deprived of that walker, dentures, hearing aids, or medications that they should be taking, but for whatever reason they're no longer taking it or on it. It might be an indication that they're being deprived or neglected. And then another one is over or under medication. Unfortunately, that's something we see in many of our cases as well. So some other signs, emotional or behavioral signs. So in the victim, seeing any sort of unusual changes in their behavior or their sleep patterns, increased fear or anxiety, isolation from friends and family. That's an extremely common one. And again, it may be a self-motivated withdrawal because something negative is going on in the person's life, or it could be, sort of brought on by the suspect in this case, or by the offender, where they're intentionally cutting off friends and family members so they can exert more control over the person who they're abusing. Withdrawal from normal activities. So again, this could be a normal part of just somebody's behavioral changes, or they may just be experiencing some sort of depression or something like that. But it could also be tied to a withdrawal because they've got something going on in their lives of an abusive nature. And then general sadness, again, go with those sudden changes in their mood, mental state, without a clear explanation. Financial signs, unusual changes in bank account or money management services. So again, signing on with a new financial planner that they apparently met at some community group or they met through church or something. It could be normal. It could be, just them seeking somebody to take, the burden of dealing with their finances off their hands, or they think somebody can manage their money better. But there's also, a real concern that somebody has learned about money that they have and is now taking steps to take control of those finances. And then, changes in bank accounts, adding people as co-signatories or, forming joint bank accounts with people, again, without a clear explanation can be a huge, huge red flag. Unusual or sudden changes in a will or other financial documents. I've handled a number of cases where quitclaim deeds were executed, basically signing over cars or property, homes that were all entangled in some sort of nefarious activity. Fraudulent signatures on financial documents. So again, notarized documents where the notary is off, or the signatures don't appear legitimate, or where your victim has signed something they don't remember, or they have signed something when they were under medical treatment and really shouldn't have been signing anything, or if they have diminished capacity. These are all things that we see, and these are all things that are significant red flags that something criminal may be taking place. And then a sudden occurrence of unpaid bills. If somebody that was really on top of their finances, made sure their bills were always paid on time, never late, never missed a payment, and then all of a sudden they start falling delinquent, falling behind on payments, that may be an indication that someone has taken control over their finances. So as we said at the beginning, I and my office are members of the New Jersey Elder Protection Task Force. We are actually the host and founding member of the EPTF, and through this collaborative effort, we're able to receive, review, and refer cases and complaints relating to elder abuse. Even if we aren't the right agency to open a case on a complaint, we can help guide or refer the matter to the right place. So that's really one of the biggest missions of this task force. So several state agencies cooperate in the task force, and that includes the Office of the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, the Office of the Public Guardian, the Department of Health, the Division of Consumer Affairs as well. And we have participation from county prosecutors' offices as well. The EPTF investigates and prosecutes elder abuse, including financial exploitation of patients in healthcare facilities and in boarding homes. The task force utilizes attorneys, investigators, nurses, auditors, and other staff to combat elder abuse. Reporting suspected abuse within the community. There's several places that can go. A good place whenever there's some issue with an older person taking place in the community, likely the best place to start is with your county's Adult Protective Services Agency and your local police department. So you can report suspected abuse for nursing home or in nursing homes or long-term care facilities to the EPTF, as well as the Long-Term Care Ombudsman. So contact information for your county APS or Adult Protective Services, I would check with your county at their website or their local office, and they're going to have the right number for you depending on where you live. For the contact for our office, the Elder Protection Task Force, you can reach us by phone at 609-292-1272. There's also an email address at the end of this presentation. So in addition to notifying the EPTF, the Long-Term Care Ombudsman, and APS, the appropriate licensing agency should be contacted for any licensed facility or individual. So again, if your concerns of abuse relate to a home health aide or a nurse or a doctor, there's licensing boards that should be made aware of concerns about the activity of those individuals, as they may be able to take action against their license. So there's just some contact information there for the Board of Medical Examiners at the state, and as well as the Nurse and Home Health Aide Board. Healthcare facilities and PCA or certified nurses aides have their own licensing offices too. Okay, so part of the title slide here was elder abuse, as well as scams that target the elderly. So the next part of our presentation is going to take a look at that. So really kind of ask yourself, what is a scam? What does that actually mean?
How do I steal people's money? You got your free lunch scam. Get in on this opportunity right now, plus you get a free lunch. Your sweetheart scam, grandparent scam, those are exciting. Hello, Grandma? I'm in jail in Tijuana. They're telling me I need $3,000. Or if I'm feeling old school, I could just jump in your garbage. Come up with a credit card bill. Ka-ching. I'm now you.
Visit the AARP Fraud Watch Network to learn how to protect yourself from identity theft, fraud, and this guy.
All right, just a plug here too. AARP, if you go to their website, they do have a lot of really good resources on the topic of fraud and scams that target the senior community. So they have a lot of really good stuff that they put out. They also do trainings regularly as well, which I've participated in a few, and they're really good. So are scams and elder abuse the same thing? I would answer with not always. There's often similarities and there's overlap, but there are also many key differences, both practically and legally speaking. Scams and elder abuse often need to be reported and handled differently. So for these scams, why do these scammers or why do the offenders target seniors? Simply put, seniors have what they want. They're more likely to have savings and retirement accounts, more likely to own a home or have equity in a home. They're more likely to have excellent credit ratings in order to take out loans or access cash. They assume that you're going to be polite and trusting. They assume that you're not going to report the crime due to embarrassment or threats. They also sometimes assume that you would not testify against them in court. They often think that you're accessible because you're home and you may have time to engage, especially if you're retired. And they also believe that you may be open to connecting with them because you're looking for companionship. Unfortunately, the bottom line is these criminals continue to target seniors because they've had success. So what are the different types of frauds that we are seeing? Many scams take place across the US or even internationally. As such, our federal counterparts, including the FBI, are often on the front lines of investigating and addressing these crimes. They're typically not taking place all within the state of New Jersey. So I'm going to give credit where credit is due. I did a presentation previously with an FBI special agent named Steve Rich, who provided this breakdown of sort of the fraud schemes and the current scams that they're seeing. So one of them that he talks about is the advanced fee scam, where a victim will pay money to someone in anticipation of receiving something of value in return, like a lottery, you've won some sort of sweepstakes, something like that. A romance scam, in which a victim will believe the person really cares for them and they will send money to them to help them when they're in need. These often play out. It's like a typical long con where they'll try to establish this long relationship and trust with the victim. Investment fraud, in which a victim will invest in property, businesses, assets that appear to be a really good deal. This is something where cryptocurrency has reared its head, unfortunately, with a lot of scams utilizing crypto as this once in a lifetime investment opportunity, and then they essentially pull the rug out from underneath the victim. Also telemarketing fraud, in which a victim will provide information to someone portraying to be a bank or the government or law enforcement or other legitimate person. So again, that's that legitimate authority where they obtain your information. Phishing, if you've not heard of phishing, not the phishing like in my photo there, but phishing with a PH, it's essentially an email from which appears to be from your bank, Amazon, or anything that they think, so in this case, they being the offenders or the scammers, they think that you're going to open. Real entities have established policies about what information they will request over the internet. So it's always best to find an independent telephone number or website so that you are contacting your bank or your actual business partner, institution, agency, whatever it is, instead of having them reach out to you with a suspicious link through an email or something like that. And I say suspicious, but oftentimes these look completely normal and legitimate, making them very hard to distinguish between a real outreach email and a fictitious one. Mass marketing emails that appear to be personal are a concern. They list some of your personal information in there, but it seems like copy and paste language. That's certainly a red flag. If you respond in any way, even saying, please take me off your list, don't, I'm not interested, they will push to develop a trusting relationship. It's what they're attempting to do. It's their only goal. So again, getting into those emails that sometimes appear legitimate. So, there is a way in which you can alter or change your email, the way that it appears, the display name for emails. So here you might see this display name at, jim@realtorforyou.com, but the email itself, the actual email address hidden, could be hackstar247@gmail.com, a much less, appropriate or, safe appearing email address. It's really not hard to do, unfortunately. It's this simple to hide your name using a Gmail account. So it's just those 5 steps there. If you're even the least bit technically savvy, you can very easily change the way your email looks to somebody to be whatever you want it to be. I will say that, some from personal experience, my wife has almost fallen for this with a fake Amazon issue scam. I want to say at least 3 or 4 times. And fortunately, each time has stopped before actually following through on the link or checking. But again, those emails, unless you actually click in to the real email address, it looks like it's coming from, order support at Amazon.com. They look absolutely legitimate until you take a closer look at where they're coming from. So common elements that you're going to see throughout all of these scams: social engineering, which we talked about earlier, legitimate authority, urgency is a big one. They're almost always going to create a sense of urgency. It's like a high pressure sales tactic. It's to get you off your game and to get you thinking you need to act now without really consulting with anybody, thinking it through, and it's going to make you, take potentially some unsafe steps. You may also see grammars or unusual language. AI is helping to clean this up. It used to be that a lot of these weren't written originally in English or by native English speakers. So you'd see some of these grammatical errors or things that didn't make sense. But unfortunately, now they're using AI to get the grammars cleaned up and them to look even more professional and legitimate. Spoofing emails and phone numbers. So spoofing is basically just copying. So they'll copy an email that you trust and use that as the fake address, or they'll copy a phone number you may recognize and then use that to place their telemarketing call. And then another one is requests for alternate payment methods, things like green dot cards, payments in cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Gift cards is another huge one where they ask for payment in gift cards. I will just say this: no legitimate law enforcement government agency, the IRS, no one is going to ask you to pay anything to them using Apple gift cards. It's just never going to happen. So that should be a huge red flag. But unfortunately, it does. It is something that they do and have had people fall for. There may also be some sort of appeal that it's part of an international movement, or if you see that the money is being moved internationally. So a basic rule of thumb is a very old but good way of thinking about this. If something seems too good to be true, it is too good to be true. And that's unfortunately a common bait that's used to get people to fall for some of these schemes. One particular scheme that's pretty sophisticated that you may have heard of before is a computer lockout scheme. And again, speaking from experience on this actually happened to my father, where somebody installed malware, so harmful software on his computer through a bad link that he clicked, that then locked his computer and sent all these scary warnings to him, saying basically that if he doesn't comply with what they want, they're going to do all kinds of horrible things, release his information or delete his entire hard drive or, whatever it is. Permanent lock. So this is, again, creating that sense of urgency that if you don't act now, they're going to do something. So here has all the elements of a scam that we talked about. So it's the appearance of legitimate authority. So it's looking like a real law enforcement agency or the federal government has locked your account because of some suspicious activity. They ask for an alternate payment method using MoneyPack to pay off whatever this is that is, available at any of those retail locations, apparently. And then also the sense of urgency that if you don't take action now, you don't follow this really suspicious looking, step here to unlock your computer, there's going to be a permanent lock put in place. Okay, so any of the criminal activities we talked about, whether it's a scam or it's, some sort of elder abuse, it's important to know where the appropriate level to report a crime. So starting at the bottom, you have your local level, so municipal level with either, so your municipal police department, they can absolutely file a complaint or report for something that's happened, a concern that you have that a crime has taken place. Some matters will be waived up to the county depending on the severity of the crime. At the state level, so our office is part of the Attorney General's office. So complaints for things taking place at the state level, so outside of just your jurisdiction, or if it falls within a specialty investigated by our office, it can be filed with the Division of Criminal Justice or one of the bureaus like ours, or it could also be investigated by the state police. And then at the federal level, their cases are prosecuted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. They're investigated by one of the smaller bureaus. So again, the FBI handles, sort of general criminal activities. There's more specialized units depending on the type of fraud. One we mentioned that I don't see on the board here, though, is Health and Human Services, OIG, would handle crimes that are specifically targeting your Medicare benefits. Okay, so just some more information on reporting a crime. Just something to, absolutely remember is that in case of an emergency, you always should dial 911. This includes any concerns about immediate harm or danger. Filing a report with your local police department is often a good first step. But here's some other resources for making those complaints. You have the Federal Trade Commission. There's also an online complaint center for the FBI. So again, some of these online-based schemes that are probably not taking place here in New Jersey, they may be taking place somewhere else in the country or even out of the country. These are something that are usually appropriate to notify the FBI about, so they're probably already looking into it. You're probably not the first to have made the complaint. You may be, but it's good for you to add whatever information you can to help them to address these concerns. All right, so that is everything that I have in my presentation. I do want to thank the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, the World Health Organization, and AARP for the content and statistics that I borrowed from them to put this presentation together. I do also want to thank my host, the New Jersey State Library, and Andrew for setting this up for me. And lastly, thanks to you for listening and being a part of this presentation. This is our main contact information. So again, we are part of the Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor, which I believe Andrew's going to be sending out the link to our website. We also have a direct phone number here, which is on the screen, and an email address where you can submit complaints by email. We also have a fax number up on the board.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Sergeant Rosati. If anybody does have questions, please feel free to send them to us using the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be happy to address them. Do you handle a car buying scam involving a senior couple? Would that be something that you would investigate, or where should somebody turn to for that?
So these things are often kind of fact specific. I'd say, if it's just the purchase of a vehicle, it's likely something that the county prosecutor would look at. So I say that only because the Office of the Insurance Fraud Prosecutor potentially would look at if there's like some sort of insurance component to it. So like falsely insuring the vehicle and then having that be incorporated in part of the exchange. But if it's a financial crime that relates to the purchase of a vehicle with misrepresentations, that would likely be handled by your county prosecutor's office. But you could start with filing a local police report.
Um, could you talk a little bit more about the percentage of elder abusers that are family members versus strangers? And maybe while you're doing this, somebody asked if you could go back to the screen that tells where to report elder abuse.
So yeah, I think the statistics said it's 90%, and I'd say that's pretty. Is this the screen that we're looking for?
I think so.
Yeah. So again, you're if it's taking place with someone who lives in the community, so that means they live in their own home, they're not in some sort of institution or healthcare facility. The best place to start would be with your local police department, so local to wherever they live, and then the county's adult protective services in the county where they live. So APS can advocate for the well-being of an adult living in the community. So if there's, even if it's not criminal, or if it falls short of criminal, they can sort of advocate for making sure that they're, well connected, well cared for, that they have the right resources, and they can intervene as necessary. And then your local police department and or the county prosecutor's office would evaluate the complaint to determine if there's a criminal case to be furthered. Then it changes if they're in an institution. So if they're living in some sort of long-term care facility, nursing home, rehab center, or other institution, then the appropriate investigating agencies would change. Long-term care ombudsman would handle advocating for the rights of the resident or patient, and then the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit would handle evaluating whether there's a criminal case to be furthered. And so to get back to the statistics, it's just about access and opportunity, I would say. There's a lot of factors that would, I guess, make the person more trusting, obviously, of a relative. The relative is going to be aware of your financial picture, may have access to your accounts already. So it's just more likely because it's easier. But it's not to say that it only comes from relatives. There's obviously that 10% who are people just that become aware. Usually they're trying to befriend or trying to provide some sort of service to them at the onset to get access to their life in order to commit some sort of abuse.
Can you give some examples of what psychological abuse might look like?
Yeah, it's usually financially motivated. In I'd say virtually all of my experiences, it's been financially motivated to some degree. But it's basically, depriving somebody of really their well-being and dignity because you're trying to obtain control over their life. They're much harder to prove because a lot more of it is subjective. So usually it's an element of a different crime or of a different, it's a fact or an element in a case where the real crime is some sort of theft or financial exploitation. But it could also be, intimidation to get somebody to not disclose that they're being neglected or to not come forward about abuse. So, they threaten to take certain things away, or they cut them off from family, or they don't let them, outside. But yeah, it's usually some sort of means to exert control.
Do you have any tips if you suspect a family member of committing abuse or fraud? How should you go about handling that?
So again, it would depend on the type of fraud and the circumstances, but most, certainly our office, and I would say most county prosecutors' offices as well, would allow you to report it anonymously as long as you provide enough information. So if there's a concern about retaliation, you certainly can at least bring the information to light, and I would encourage you to do so. Obviously family dynamics make everything more difficult and it becomes harder to prove, especially if the person providing the information can't completely or won't completely cooperate in the investigation. But it's something to discuss because they can certainly work out, and sort of maybe put you at ease with the process, which makes you more comfortable with coming forward. Hopefully that answers your question.
Somebody asked a follow-up, specifically if that family member might be the primary caregiver. Do you have any strategies for dealing with that aspect?
Yeah, and it's certainly a concern, and it's something that Adult Protective Services would have, has a lot of experience in dealing with, because again, they're not there to criminally charge anybody or hold anybody criminally responsible. They're there to advocate for the well-being of the older adult. So if there's a concern about lack of continuity of care, if this person were to leave or were to be removed, they have all those resources to make sure the person, hey, whether they qualify for some program that allows a different aid to come in, or perhaps they qualify to go into some sort of assisted living facility, or that's a more appropriate place for them to get care. They're very well versed in navigating those, and we work with them all the time. So
Can you talk a little bit about confronting somebody? Should you do it yourself, or should you just let the authorities handle it?
I would say it's always a best practice to report it and let the authorities handle it. Um, So again, just because you want it to be documented, there's, I don't see many of these things ever getting resolved because you made, or because the offender was made aware that the family is upset with how they're handling things. Um, so yeah, I would tend to say take some sort of official action, and don't try to handle them yourself. So report it to, whether that's our office or consulting with one of these agencies to bring the information to light, would be my, universally would be my recommendation.
Alrighty, I don't see any more questions, but we can give it another minute or two. Oh, here comes one. If a person lives alone, is there an agency that might provide periodic wellness checks?
Um, so again, that's something that if there's a concern about the well-being of an individual living alone in the community, that's something I would probably refer to Adult Protective Services to see what the appropriate way to make sure they're still staying connected would be. There's things you can do unofficially, obviously, like try to have them, signed up in community groups or reach out. Most counties have like an office on aging where they'll have some sort of senior center that does outreach. So things like that, a little less officially, if there's not a real tangible concern about their well-being. But if you have concerns about whether it's safe for them to be, in the home, uh, I would generally say APS would be who I would speak to. You can request from your local, from their local law enforcement office or their local police department for a well check, but that's really for not a chronic ongoing thing. It's more of a, I haven't heard from this person in a while, I can't reach them. Can you go make sure that something bad hasn't happened? They haven't fallen, or they haven't, um, withdrawn for some other reason. It's usually more of, that's an acute response. Ongoing, I would say probably consult with APS to see if there's something that should be in place.
How did you handle or resolve the situation with your father's computer?
He actually handled it himself. He just he realized that he didn't tell me about it till afterwards. And his was different than the example I showed. His wasn't where it looked like a federal agency was locking his computer down. This was like an IT scam where it was like they pretended to be Microsoft and said there was an issue with his version of Windows and they wanted him to call and all this stuff. So he unfortunately went through a few steps, but as soon as they started asking him for any like private information, the red flags and the whistles went off and he just disengaged. And even though they had some sort of, if you don't follow through, your computer is going to get, turned off permanently, whatever. Yeah, he just stopped engaging with them. And then he eventually took it to like a computer shop or whatever, who found he had some software that they could remove that was a malicious malware. Some malicious software had gotten installed that they were able to easily remove. So luckily it wasn't a huge, so I know some, like the computer is ruined and all your information has been hijacked. This was a little less sophisticated. But yeah, I only found out after the fact. But I don't know that I would have told him to do anything different than just shut it down, stop engaging, and find somebody to remove whatever's been installed in there.
Alrighty, well, thank you so much, Sergeant Rosati. We really appreciate your time here and sharing this information and the resources available to everybody. Again, if anybody has questions, you can contact um, Sergeant Rosati directly, or you can also contact the let me see, the office. You can the Medicare Fraud Control Unit, or the office of the insurance fraud prosecutors. So there's a lot of ways that you can get help if you need it. So I encourage you to share this amongst your family and friends, because education is the best tool to help with this. So I really strongly encourage you to be active and vigilant. So, and thank you, Sergeant Rosati, and thank you everybody for attending today. This program was recorded, so a link will be sent to everybody who registered once it is available. And just everybody be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll see you soon.